Good evening. The organizers of today's pro-democracy rally, the first since the Occupy protests last year, say 13,000 people joined their march, while police put the figure at 8,800. That's far fewer protesters than they had hoped for, but leaders of the Occupy sit-ins insist it doesn't mean their so-called umbrella movement is dying. Emily Thiel reports.
A sea of umbrellas re-emerged on the streets of Hong Kong this afternoon as thousands of people marched from Causeway Bay to Central in the name of greater democracy. Many prominent pro-democracy figures, such as the brains behind the original Occupy Central movement, Benny Tai, and Democratic Party founder Martin Lee joined the 2.5-hour march. Many held signs and chanted slogans demanding genuine universal suffrage for the 2017 chief executive election. The activists claim Beijing will use its conservative framework, made official on the 31st of August, to screen out candidates critical of the central government. While a few brought their babies along, some made sure they were heard, while others carried colonial flags. The organizers, the Civil Human Rights Front, were hoping for around 50,000 to show up, but the final turnout was a lot less for the first protest since the street occupations ended in December.
I believe that particularly after the occupation, many young people also find that demonstration of this type may not be able to affect the government. So probably this affect the number of turnout today.
Members of student group Scholarism and the Federation of Students, who led the 79-day pro-democracy mass sit-ins last year, also joined this afternoon's rally. They insisted the low turnout doesn't mean support for the so-called umbrella movement is fizzling out.
Well, we will not be defeated. The movement will be ongoing. People who would go for democracy, they will still support democratic movement. But it is simply that, well, they may choose different way of joining or showing their support to the whole movement.
Some of the more radical protesters have said they may stage a sit-in after the march. But both Chow and Joshua Wong from Scholarism weren't sure whether they would join in.
If some of the parties or some of the organizations have organized some of the action after the demonstration, Scholarism will give some of the consideration of whether we will involve in the action or not.
In response to the rally, the government issued a statement urging people to adopt a rational and pragmatic approach towards constitutional development. Independent Police Complaints Council Chief Larry Kwok, meanwhile, said the march today was generally peaceful. But organizers say there were problems due to the way police handled some of the protesters' props.
Some parties' street stations are being restricted by police, including the size of their backdrop, including the size of their station.
Today's mass rally was originally scheduled for New Year's Day, but organizers postponed it due to the government's second consultation on political reform. The front wanted the march to be held during the consultation, so it could be used as a channel for the public to express their views on the government's proposals.
There were scuffles outside Government House after today's rally as pro-democracy activists staged a protest. Several members of People Power, including lawmaker Albert Chan, tried to storm the chief executive's residence on Upper Albert Road and demand he step down. They hurled paper money and eggs at the gate before being stopped by police officers, who vastly outnumbered them. No one was injured and order was restored within minutes. Executive Council convener Lam Wun Kwong told the Pan-Democrats today that universal suffrage could happen by 2020 if they pass the government's reforms. At the same time, Civic Party lawmaker Ronnie Tong accused his fellow Pan-Democrats of being too extreme in their demands for democracy. And Chang reports.
Moderate Pan-Democrat Ronnie Tong has never been afraid of speaking his mind, even if it means criticizing fellow pro-democracy lawmakers. In an interview on TV today, he accused them of lacking political intelligence and having a habit of forcing themselves into a corner with no way out. Tong said his fellow Pan-Democrats should use their veto powers to focus on fighting for universal suffrage for the LegCo elections in 2020. He reiterated his intention to talk his Pan-Democrat colleagues into voting for the government's political reform package if Beijing promises to abolish LegCo's functional constituency seats in 2020 and lower the chief executive nomination threshold. Meanwhile, on a radio show, Executive Council convener Lam Wun Kwong said the 2007 political reform proposals stated that there will be universal suffrage in the 2020 LegCo elections, but only after there's universal suffrage in the chief executive election. In other words, lawmakers must pass the government's latest political reform plans first.
LegCo may go for universal suffrage by 2020, May. But May, of course, is an indication of direction. So I do hope and I do appeal for the legislators in particular to consider this fact that if you don't move in 2017 on the CE's election, then you can't move in the election for LegCo in 2020. So everything is linked up.
He added that the Pan-Democrats have to be realistic. Since Beijing's stance is so hard, they can't use threatening tactics when negotiating political reforms. Lam urged the Pan-Democrats to think about what most Hong Kongers want before casting their votes. Ann Chang, ATV News.
Opposition lawmakers and student leaders weren't impressed by Ronnie Tong's call to endorse the government's reforms. They said history will remember those who break their promises and despise those who turn their backs against Hong Kongers fighting for greater democracy. Here's Emily Siu.
Opposition lawmakers who showed up in this afternoon's pro-democracy march, the first rally since last year's 79-day civil disobedience campaign, took aim at their moderate colleague, Ronnie Tong. Tong suggested earlier that he's willing to endorse the government's blueprint for the 2017 chief executive election if Beijing promises to abolish functional constituency seats in LegCo by 2020. The Civic Party lawmaker said this after he and his 26 opposition colleagues vowed to veto the government's political reform package if it was set under Beijing's conservative framework. Leader of Tong's party, Alan Leung, hit back at his claim that the opposition camp doesn't have enough political intelligence. Beijing did not respond to someone as politically intelligent as Tong, Leung said. This shows the central government doesn't want to give Hong Kong people any type of universal suffrage. The Neo Democrats Gary Fan said he completely disagrees with Tong's proposal.
I think Mr. Tong, Ronnie Tong, do not whatsoever represent the whole pan-democratic camp. He only represents himself. He might change his voting behavior, may vote for government constitutional reform proposal, but doesn't mean other pan-democratic member will follow his behavior.
Federation of Students leader Alex Chow said that if Tong goes back on his own word and endorses the government's electoral blueprint, his decision will be remembered in history and he will be despised by the Hong Kong people.
Labour Chief Matthew Yeung is proposing increasing compensation for employees who get injured at work. Meanwhile, Finance Chief John Tsang says subsidies for elderly healthcare services will not be cut this year. Alison Chan reports.
With its 8th budget just a few weeks away, Financial Secretary John Tsang took to his blog today to talk about health care, promising not to cut assistance for senior citizens in the coming fiscal year. Last year, the government allocated $6.2 billion for elderly services, which was 15% higher than the year before. Tsang also insisted there is money to be made for businesses that provide care and emergency services for the elderly. He said besides being profitable, it improves the welfare of old people. The government recorded a budget surplus of $35.2 billion for the third quarter, more than triple Tsang's estimates for the whole year. Labour and Welfare Minister Matthew Yeung also took to his blog today, saying he would suggest increasing compensation for work-related injuries and diseases at a LegCo meeting on Wednesday. He suggests increases of between 5.73% and 44.44%. If lawmakers pass the proposals, the increases will come into effect from the 5th of March. Yeung also pledged to review compensation-related ordinances every 2 years. Alison Chan, ATV News.
Overseas, there's been widespread international outrage at the video, apparently showing the execution of a second Japanese hostage held by Islamic State militants. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe said the killing will not stop his fight against the militant group. Arthur Ercula reports.
To the Japanese government, you, like your foolish allies in the satanic coalition, have yet to understand that we, by Allah's grace, are an Islamic caliphate with authority and power. An entire army thirsty for your blood.
This message from Islamic State was followed by shots of the severed head of Japanese journalist Kenji Goto placed on the back of his body. The video comes exactly a week after footage was released that apparently showed the beheaded body of another Japanese hostage, Haruna Yukawa. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe condemned the apparent beheading, calling it unjust and cowardly. He insisted Japan would not give in to terrorism and will continue aiding the fight against it. The executions came after Abe announced a $200 million donation to countries fighting Islamic State. Goto's mother, Junko Ishido, said she could only express her grief with her tears. She told reporters she would continue to believe in her son's wish for a world without war. Residents of Tokyo were disappointed with the news of Goto's apparent death. This man said he was hoping until the very end for the journalist's return. This woman said the killing made her realize Japan cannot remain in a complacent stupor of pacifism. A small vigil was held for the slain journalist outside Abe's office, although some Japanese have blamed the Prime Minister's more assertive defense policies for the recent hostage situations. Members of the Western-led coalition fighting Islamic State condemned the latest execution.
This just demonstrates how important it is that all countries do what they reasonably can to disrupt and degrade this death cult which has ushered in a new dark age over parts of the Middle East.
We stand together with the people of Japan and indeed with all our allies against terrorism wherever it rears its head.
Meanwhile, there's no news of the fate of a Jordanian pilot who is being held with the two Japanese hostages. Authorities had been hoping to secure the release of Goto and the pilot in exchange for a failed female Iraqi suicide bomber captured in Jordan a decade ago. The pilot's relatives said they feared the worst, as the militants said they would kill him if the prisoner was not released last week. Arthur Urquiola, ATV News.
A Chinese woman is fighting for her life in South Korea after a plastic surgery operation went wrong. It's believed neither the clinic nor doctor who performed the surgery had the proper medical licenses. And the reports.
The clinic where the 50-year-old mainland woman went to is in the popular Gangnam district of Seoul. A CCTV reporter visited the clinic but could not find the owner. The woman was rushed to a nearby hospital on Tuesday after her heart stopped while she was having cosmetic surgery on her eyes and nose. She is now in a vegetative state. It's believed the plastic surgery clinic the victim went to did not have a license. A member of the Association of Plastic Surgeons, Jo Soo-young, said many private clinics don't have medical licenses and are operated by businessmen who illegally hire surgeons to conduct cosmetic procedures. Korea is a popular destination for Chinese people who join beauty tours of the country and get plastic surgery while they're there. But Joe warned that there are less than 2,000 registered plastic surgeons in the country, 1/10 of the number on the market. Meanwhile, police in Zhejiang province have confiscated more than 2,000 fake Botox injections and arrested 38 people in Beijing, Jilin and Guangdong involved in a counterfeit cosmetic scam. Media reports say a beauty clinic owner purchased fake Botox online and used it on her clients. The Botox was manufactured on the mainland and sold to clinics in 9 provinces across the country.
Sport news. Novak Djokovic reasserted his rule over the hard courts of Melbourne Park by beating Andy Murray to win his 5th Australian Open title. The